Imagine standing at the altar, ready to begin the life you've always dreamed of, when a devastating truth comes to light. The woman you love was never truly yours. She confesses right there that she's always been in love with someone else. Your own brother. In the midst of stunned faces, broken hearts, and long-hidden secrets, everything you believed falls apart. What would you do? How do you survive this betrayal? Get ready for a journey of passion, betrayal, and redemption that will grip you from start to finish.
From the earliest memories I have, my older brother Greg has been more than just family. He was the foundation on which I built my sense of strength, my self-worth. His presence had always been magnetic, effortlessly commanding attention wherever he went. He was everything I aspired to be: calm, confident, and somehow always in control. There was a natural ease between us that seemed unbreakable, like the unspoken bond that grows through shared secrets, whispered adventures, and quiet understanding. But there was something about Greg that I never fully understood, a subtle force he exuded, one that both drew people in and kept them at a careful distance. I admired him for it, perhaps too much. It's hard to admit, but sometimes I felt dwarfed by his shadow. Yet, the admiration was always there, alongside a quiet envy that lingered like a phantom between us. As much as I idolized him, part of me wondered if I would ever fully step out from under his influence, be seen as an equal, or remain forever caught in his orbit. Even through our childhood spats, there was an underlying spark, something that always pulled us back together. He had a way of looking at me, with those sharp, knowing eyes that made me feel both seen and judged. When I felt lost or uncertain, Greg was the one who could cut through my doubts, offering advice in that calm, almost hypnotic voice of his. His words had a way of sinking deep, echoing in my mind long after our conversations had ended. When Greg married Stephanie, I tried to see it as a natural extension of our family growing. She was beautiful, radiant even. Her presence seemed to light up the room whenever she entered. The way she fit into our family, the effortless warmth she exuded, made her feel like she had always been a part of us. But beneath that warmth, something more primal flickered, a tension I couldn't quite place. I chalked it up to nerves, to the changes that marriage brings. But there was something in the way Greg and Stephanie interacted, a sensual energy that sometimes left me feeling like an outsider to their shared world. Still, I loved Stephanie like a sister. She had an air of serenity, the kind of woman who could calm a storm just by being present. Yet, as close as we became, there was always an underlying current of unease, small moments that seemed charged with something I couldn't name. It felt, at times, like I was watching my brother live the life I had only dreamed of, and I tried to push those thoughts away, to drown them in the normalcy of family gatherings and shared memories. But family ties are never that simple, and the foundation I had always relied on began to crack in ways I never expected. The bond that once seemed so strong between Greg and me started to shift, to tremble under the weight of secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. Looking back, I wonder if that bond was ever as stable as I thought, or if it had always been fraying at the edges, waiting for the right moment to unravel. When Greg married Stephanie, it felt like the final piece of his perfect life falling into place. Their relationship seemed effortless, almost enviable. They were the couple that everyone admired, beautiful, successful, always in sync. Watching them together, it was hard not to feel a pang of something deeper. A kind of longing, not just for the ease they shared, but for the way Greg always seemed to have what others couldn't, including Stephanie. At first, I brushed it off. Stephanie was like family to me, someone who had effortlessly slipped into our lives and brought warmth to our family gatherings. But sometimes, when the three of us were together, I'd catch a glimpse of something, an exchange of glances between them that felt almost too intimate. There was an electricity between them, the kind of chemistry that fills a room but goes unnoticed until it's too late. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that I was overthinking, but those small, charged moments lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Then came the day Stephanie confided in me, shattering the illusion I had clung to for so long. Her voice was soft, hesitant, as if she didn't want to believe the words coming from her own lips. "Greg's been seeing someone else," she admitted, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone, showing me the proof. I stared at the messages, the photos, flashes of a life Greg had hidden from all of us. There were tender words exchanged between him and another woman, a colleague from work. They were more than just flirty texts. They were windows into an affair that seemed as passionate as it was secret. My stomach twisted. Greg, the person I had always looked up to, the one who had always been so sure, so certain, had crossed a line I never thought he would. As Stephanie laid out the evidence, my mind struggled to reconcile the Greg I knew with the man in those messages. How had he let things spiral this far? And why hadn't I seen it? But it wasn't just the betrayal that hit me. It was the raw vulnerability in Stephanie's eyes as she confessed that Greg had chosen someone else, that despite their picture-perfect marriage, something vital had been missing. I could feel the pull between them unraveling. But there was more, a shadow of doubt that crept into my mind and settled in my chest. A doubt that whispered, "What else don't you know?" As the days went on, Stephanie's words haunted me. Our once close family dinners became strained, filled with silence and awkward pauses. I couldn't shake the image of Greg and his colleague, their secret exchanges, the world they had built outside the confines of his marriage. And I couldn't help but wonder if I had missed something closer to home. My unease grew, swirling into suspicion that something deeper was wrong, not just in Greg's marriage, but in my own relationship with Chloe. I tried to push the thought away, tried to bury it under the weight of my loyalty to Greg. But the tension between them, between all of us, was palpable, like a taut string that could snap at any moment. And no matter how much I wanted to believe that Greg's infidelity was the only secret, there was a lingering sense that I had only just scratched the surface of what was truly happening. It started with a flicker of doubt, a brief exchange of glances that made my skin prickle. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid. Chloe and Greg had always gotten along. They laughed together, shared jokes, even indulged in conversations that sometimes left me on the periphery. But lately, there was something different, something more. It wasn't just the friendly banter or the occasional text between them. No, this was more intimate. Subtle, yes, but undeniably there. I would catch Chloe smiling at her phone more often, her fingers typing quickly as if she was racing to keep up with the conversation. At first, I didn't think much of it until I saw Greg's name flash across her screen. There was a sudden tightness in my chest, a knot of unease that wouldn't go away. My mind ran wild with scenarios, but I pushed it down, desperate to believe that it was all in my head. Greg had already betrayed Stephanie. Surely, he wouldn't do the same to me. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave. One evening, as we were lying in bed, I asked Chloe about Greg. "You two seem to talk a lot these days," I said, keeping my voice casual, though my pulse quickened as I awaited her response. She didn't hesitate. "Greg just appreciates my perspective. We talk about things, life, work. He's going through a lot, you know." Her answer was smooth, too smooth. But it was the way she said appreciates that gnawed at me. The way her lips curled into a soft, almost secretive smile. There was something in her tone, something unspoken, and it sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to press her, to ask what exactly Greg found so valuable in her company that he hadn't found with his wife. Or me. But the words caught in my throat, and I found myself nodding, as if accepting her explanation would make everything go away. Days passed, and my suspicions only grew. Every shared look between Chloe and Greg felt loaded. Every touch, however innocent it seemed, sent a jolt of anger and jealousy through me. I began watching them more closely, trying to decipher the meaning behind their smiles, their laughter. Was I imagining it? Or was there something there? Something that had been growing quietly beneath the surface, unnoticed until now. Then came the breaking point. Stephanie, who had grown more distant as the days passed, finally revealed the truth I hadn't been ready to face. She had seen messages between Greg and Chloe, messages that, while not explicit, were intimate in a way that no one but a lover could understand. At first, she had dismissed them as harmless, even friendly. But the frequency, the late-night timing of them, made her think twice. They talk like you're not even in the picture, she said softly, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. I felt the floor drop out from under me. My breath came in shallow bursts as I tried to process what she was saying. Chloe? My Chloe and Greg? The idea was absurd, but the evidence was right there, staring me in the face. I tried to confront Chloe, to get a straight answer, but her response only deepened my confusion. He values what I have to say, she said, her voice calm, almost detached. More than you do sometimes. That one sentence sent a wave of cold fury through me. More than I did? What had she been telling him that she couldn't share with me? What part of herself had she been giving to Greg that I had somehow failed to reach? Chloe assured me that nothing inappropriate had happened, that it was all just emotional support, nothing more. But the tone of her voice, the way she avoided my gaze as she spoke, left me filled with doubts. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that Greg and Chloe's relationship was nothing more than a deepening friendship. But the unease, the jealousy, the simmering anger bubbling beneath the surface was becoming too much to ignore. Every time I saw them together, every time I saw her phone light up with his name, I felt the walls closing in. Was I losing my grip on reality? Or was I witnessing the slow unraveling of everything I had believed to be true? The tension was unbearable. I found myself caught between two people I loved, unable to tell where the boundaries of friendship ended and the territory of betrayal began. And through it all, Greg remained silent, his knowing eyes watching, as if daring me to confront the truth I wasn't ready to face. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was nothing like I expected. I had imagined shouting, tears, perhaps even a confession. But Chloe met my accusations with calm, unshaken confidence. She didn't flinch when I mentioned the messages or the growing intimacy between her and Greg. Instead, she looked at me with a mix of disappointment and amusement, as if I had somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. "You think there's something going on between me and Greg?" she asked, her tone level, almost condescending. "God, you don't trust me at all? Do you?" There was no hesitation in her voice. If she was guilty, she wasn't going to show it. My anger faltered in the face of her conviction, leaving me feeling small, insecure, like I had somehow misread everything. She handed me her phone without a second thought, her eyes daring me to find something damning. "Go ahead, look through it. Find whatever it is you think you'll find." I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the screen, but something stopped me. It was the way she stood there, so self-assured, as if she knew I wouldn't find anything, or worse, that if I did, I'd question myself instead of her. Chloe had a way of twisting things, of making me doubt my own instincts. And just like that, the tables had turned. I wasn't the one accusing anymore. I was the one defending my jealousy, my insecurity. "It's not about the messages," I finally said, my voice faltering. "It's the way you've been with him. The way you two look at each other." She let out a soft, mocking laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with practiced elegance. "Greg and I just get along. We have things in common, things you don't really care about. Is that a crime now? Is it wrong to have friends?" Her words stung, cutting deeper than I'd expected. Chloe had always known how to push my buttons, but now it felt like she was enjoying it, like this game of making me question my sanity was giving her some kind of twisted satisfaction. Every word she spoke, every carefully measured pause, felt like a calculated strike designed to keep me off balance. "You're overreacting," she added, her voice softening just enough to make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I was. "Greg is your brother. I would never. How could you even think that of me?" There was a tenderness in her words now, a false sincerity that made my chest tighten. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing lightly against my arm, sending a shiver through me. "You're being paranoid, baby. You know that, right? You've been stressed about everything, and I think it's making you see things that aren't there." Her touch lingered, and for a moment, I felt my resolve weakening. Chloe had a way of pulling me in, of making me want to believe her, even when every fiber of my being screamed that something was wrong. She leaned in, her lips grazing my ear as she whispered, "I'm not the one you should be worried about." Her words hung in the air, laced with a dangerous ambiguity. I pulled back, searching her eyes for some clue, some crack in the mask she wore so well. But there was nothing, just that same calm, confident gaze that had me doubting everything I thought I knew. Chloe wasn't just denying my accusations. She was making me doubt myself, turning my fears back on me with subtle, almost sensual precision. "I love you," she said softly, her fingers trailing down my chest. "But if you can't trust me, what do we have?" It was a trap, one I could feel closing around me, but I didn't know how to escape it. She was asking me to trust her, to ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind, the one that whispered that Greg wasn't just a friend. But her touch, her voice, it all made me question myself. Was I really seeing things that weren't there? Had I let my jealousy cloud my judgment? For the first time, I felt like I was losing control, not just of the situation, but of myself. Chloe had me right where she wanted me, wrapped around her finger, torn between the desire to believe her and the fear that I was walking into a trap of my own making. And through it all, Greg remained silent, his presence looming over us like a shadow. He didn't need to say anything. Chloe was doing the work for him, pulling me deeper into a web of doubt and confusion. I wanted to confront him, to force the truth out of him, but every time I thought about it, Chloe's words echoed in my mind. "You're overreacting. There's nothing there." But I wasn't sure I could believe that anymore. Despite all the doubts swirling in my mind, despite the late-night whispers of suspicion that kept me awake, I made the decision to move forward with Chloe. There was a part of me, maybe the desperate part, that believed that by committing to her, by making this leap of faith, things would go back to the way they were. I wanted to believe that marriage would erase the tension, would somehow reset everything between us. But deep down, a darker voice whispered that I was only fooling myself. When I proposed, Chloe's reaction was different than I expected. She smiled, of course, but it wasn't the radiant, breathless smile I had imagined. There was a pause in her eyes, a flicker of something unreadable before she said yes. She wrapped her arms around me, kissed me, told me she loved me. But that momentary hesitation lingered, clinging to my thoughts like a shadow. From that point on, I found myself fighting to keep the illusion of happiness alive. I told myself that the awkwardness in our conversations was just pre-wedding jitters, that Chloe's sudden distance was simply stress from planning the ceremony. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't ignore the shift in her. The way she looked at me seemed different, detached, as if she were somewhere else entirely, somewhere I couldn't reach. There were small moments that gnawed at me. We'd be discussing the wedding plans, and I'd suggest something. Flowers, music, a venue. And Chloe would nod absent-mindedly, barely engaging. The spark that once lit up her face when we talked about our future was gone, replaced by something cold and indifferent. Sometimes, when I tried to pull her close, she'd stiffen ever so slightly before relaxing into my arms, as though my touch had become a reminder of something she no longer wanted but felt obligated to accept. I told myself it was normal, that all couples went through rough patches before the big day. But there was something deeper beneath the surface, something that went beyond nerves. Chloe wasn't just distant. She was drifting, slipping away from me inch by inch, and I couldn't find the words to pull her back. I found myself watching her more closely, searching for signs that she still wanted this, that she still wanted me. The nights grew longer, filled with unspoken words and silences that stretched between us like chasms. I would lie awake, listening to her breathing beside me, wondering if she was thinking about Greg, wondering if her heart was already elsewhere. I wanted to ask her, to demand the truth, but every time I tried, the words caught in my throat. The fear of what she might say kept me paralyzed. As the wedding day approached, the sense of unease grew stronger. Even my family and friends began to notice. "Is Chloe okay?" They'd ask, their voices filled with quiet concern. "She seems different." I shrugged off their questions, forcing a smile, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, I felt the same dread they did. On the day of the wedding, standing at the altar, I should have felt joy, excitement, something. But all I could feel was a cold, knot of anxiety, tightening in my stomach. Chloe walked down the aisle in her white dress, looking every bit the beautiful bride. But her eyes, those eyes that had once captivated me, were distant, almost hollow. She smiled at me as she approached, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that felt like a mask. As we exchanged vows, my hands trembled. I kept waiting for a moment of clarity, for something to break through the haze of doubt that had consumed me. But it never came. Chloe's voice was soft, her words practiced, but I could feel the emptiness behind them. It was as if she were going through the motions, playing a part she no longer wanted to play. And then, as we stood there, surrounded by friends and family, Greg caught my eye. He stood in the crowd, his expression unreadable, his presence a constant reminder of the lingering doubts that had haunted me. I felt his gaze burning into me, and suddenly, I was no longer sure of anything. Chloe said, "I do," but in that moment, I felt as though I were the only one who didn't. The air felt heavy as the reception began. People laughed, clinked glasses, and congratulated us, but their voices seemed distant, muffled. I stood beside Chloe, watching her as she moved through the crowd, her smile fixed in place like a mask. It was the same smile she'd worn when we exchanged vows, a smile that didn't belong to me. As the night wore on, the tension between us became suffocating. Every glance, every touch felt wrong, like we were actors in a play neither of us wanted to be part of. And then, it happened. Greg stepped forward to give his speech. I watched him closely, my chest tightening as he took the microphone. His voice was warm, his words carefully chosen, but beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent, a charge that made my skin prickle. He spoke about our childhood, about the bond we shared as brothers, and how happy he was for me. But then his tone shifted, became quieter, more intimate, and he turned toward Chloe. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. He looked at her in a way that made my heart lurch, his eyes lingering on hers just a little too long. "Chloe," he said, his voice soft and filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You've brought so much light into my brother's life, and into mine as well." There was a strange pause, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me, toward Greg, toward Chloe. I wanted to scream, to stop whatever was about to happen, but I was frozen, trapped in the moment as Greg's words hung in the air. He continued, his voice thick with something unspoken. "It's funny, isn't it? How life brings people together in ways you never expect. Sometimes you meet someone, and they just fit." His gaze flickered to me, then back to Chloe, and I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. The room had gone silent, the air thick with anticipation. I looked at Chloe, searching for some kind of denial, some sign that this wasn't what I feared it was. But instead, I saw something worse. Her eyes, glassy from the champagne, were fixed on Greg, and there was a quiet, resigned acceptance in them. Later, as the guests became distracted with the music and the open bar, Chloe found me. She was tipsy, her cheeks flushed, but there was a gravity in her expression that sobered me instantly. She didn't bother with pleasantries, didn't try to sugarcoat what she was about to say. Instead, she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered the words that would unravel everything. "I love Greg." I pulled back, staring at her, waiting for the punchline, the joke that would never come. But her face was serious, her eyes brimming with a strange mix of guilt and relief. "I've loved him for years," she confessed, her voice slurred but sincere. "I didn't want to hurt you, but Greg has always been the one." The world around me blurred. It was as if the sounds of the party, the laughter, the music, all faded into the background, leaving only her words, echoing in my mind. "Greg has always been the one. I care about you," she continued, her voice softer now, as if that would soften the blow. "But I've been lying to myself. I thought I could love you the way you deserve, but I can't. You were never. He was always." I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, and all I saw was a stranger. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I tried," she said, her voice cracking. "I wanted to love you. I really did, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. He's everything I've ever wanted, and I I settled for you because I couldn't have him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, each one sharper than the last. Settled. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I had been her second choice all along, a consolation prize for the man she truly wanted but could never have. I stared at her, the love I once felt for her crumbling into dust before my eyes. My throat tightened, anger rising in me like a wave, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal that washed over me. My own wedding had become a theater for her confession, a cruel twist of fate that left me humiliated in front of everyone I knew. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said, her voice shaking. I thought I could move on, that I could love you the way you deserved, but I can't lie to myself anymore. I can't lie to you. Her confession left me hollow, my hands trembling as I realized the full weight of what she had just admitted. She had stood there at the altar, smiling, saying vows she didn't mean, all while her heart belonged to my brother. I can't do this, I muttered, more to myself than to her. I can't stay. And with that, I turned away, the sounds of the party crashing back into my awareness like a distant storm, as if the world outside had continued spinning while mine had come to a devastating halt. The weight of Chloe's confession pressed down on me like a physical force. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat reverberating with the humiliation and betrayal that now consumed me. I stood there, in the middle of what was supposed to be our celebration, surrounded by friends and family, but I had never felt more alone. I turned to look at Chloe, her face flushed from the alcohol, her eyes glassy with a strange mixture of guilt and relief. The confession had left her lighter, unburdened, while it crushed me under the weight of its truth. The woman I had planned to spend my life with had just admitted, in the most casual way, that I had always been second best. The realization twisted inside me, cutting deeper with every second that passed. The music swirled around us, people oblivious to the disaster unfolding at the heart of the celebration. I watched as Chloe swayed slightly, still standing too close, her hand brushing my arm in what was meant to be a gesture of comfort. But all I felt was a cold emptiness. I can't do this, I muttered, louder this time, the words tumbling from my lips before I had fully processed them. Chloe's face fell, confusion mixing with regret as she tried to reach for me again. Wait, please. I didn't want you to find out like this. Her voice, once so familiar and soothing, now grated against me, each word a reminder of the betrayal that had been hidden behind her smile for so long. I took a step back, putting space between us, needing air, needing to breathe. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in as the enormity of what had happened finally settled in my mind. No, I said, louder this time, feeling the eyes of the guests around us beginning to turn, sensing that something was terribly wrong. No, Chloe, I can't. This can't continue. The murmurs around us grew louder as the crowd began to realize that something was happening, that this wasn't just an intimate moment between newlyweds. I saw my mother's concerned face from across the room, her eyes searching mine, trying to understand. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the tension. And Greg stood at the back, his expression blank, watching it all unfold without a word. I'm sorry, I continued, my voice hoarse, barely able to hold back the flood of emotions crashing through me. I can't marry someone who doesn't love me. Chloe's face drained of color. She reached for me again, her voice trembling. No, wait. Please. We can fix this. We can. I shook my head, the weight of everything finally collapsing in on itself. How? How can we fix this, Chloe? You just told me you love Greg. You've loved him for years. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, the raw truth of them echoing through the silence that had now settled over the room. The guests were watching us now, their hushed conversations dying out as the reality of what was happening became clear. The bride and groom weren't having a lover's quarrel. They were watching a marriage fall apart in real time, right before their eyes. Chloe's family moved closer, concern etched into their faces. Her mother stepped forward, trying to intervene. She's drunk. She doesn't know what she's saying, she insisted, her voice frantic, as if it could undo everything that had already been said. You two just need to talk. But it was too late. The truth was out, and no amount of rationalizing could take it back. I felt my fists clench at my sides, the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface now threatening to break free. She wasn't drunk when she told me she's been in love with Greg for years, I said, my voice shaking with fury. She wasn't drunk when she made me believe I was enough for her. The room was silent, the weight of my words pressing down on everyone. I saw the shock in people's faces, the disbelief, the pity. And I hated it. I hated that I had to be the one to stand here, in front of everyone I knew, and tear apart the life I had thought we were building together. I'm calling off the wedding, I said, my voice breaking but firm. This is over. Chloe's face crumpled, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized the full extent of what had just happened. Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy for her. I was beyond that now. She had made her choice, long before today, and now we were both paying the price for it. The guests remained frozen, unsure of what to do, unsure if they should leave or stay. I saw the confusion, the awkward glances exchanged between them. Greg finally stepped forward, his face pale, as if he were about to say something. But I couldn't bear to hear his voice. I turned away, unable to look at him, unable to face the full weight of this betrayal. I'm done, I whispered to myself, more than to anyone else, as I walked away from the wreckage of my own wedding. The sound of the music faded, the laughter, the joy. All of it was a distant memory now. All that remained was the cold, empty shell of what should have been the happiest day of my life. The days following the wedding felt surreal, like I was living in the shadow of a life that had crumbled to pieces. The shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. There were no more guests, no more wedding plans, just silence, thick and suffocating. My phone buzzed constantly with missed calls, messages from friends and family trying to understand what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say? That the woman I had loved had chosen my brother? That everything I thought I knew had been a lie? Chloe had stayed with her parents, giving me space that I wasn't sure I even wanted anymore. But the conversation we both dreaded was inevitable. A few days after the wedding that never was, we met in the apartment we had shared. It felt strange to be there with her, the space so familiar, yet now so alien. The memories of us, of what we had built together, haunted every corner, every room. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes red-rimmed from days of crying. The guilt was etched into her face. And yet, there was something else too, an odd sense of closure, as if finally admitting the truth had freed her from some invisible burden. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her, the woman I had once believed I would spend my life with, and I couldn't summon the anger I thought I'd feel. It was just sadness now, a deep, overwhelming sadness for what could have been. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly, the question hanging between us like a ghost. You could have ended this before it got this far. Chloe shook her head, her hands wringing together in her lap. I thought I could move on, that I could make it work with you because I cared about you. But Greg, I never stopped loving him. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop. And it's not fair to you. Her honesty stung, even though I had known the truth for days now. Hearing her say it, seeing the regret in her eyes, didn't make it any easier. So all this time, you were just settling? I asked, my voice barely audible, as if saying it too loudly would make it hurt more. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to meet my gaze. I wanted it to be different. I really did, but I couldn't pretend anymore. I let out a shaky breath, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy fog. And Greg? I asked, my voice hardening slightly. What about him? Did he know? Chloe shook her head. No, he never knew how I felt. I never told him, but I think he sensed it. That's why he's been distant lately. He didn't want to make things worse. The anger I had felt toward Greg still simmered beneath the surface, but now it was tinged with something more complicated. He hadn't crossed the line, hadn't betrayed me in the way I had feared. But still, the damage was done. The trust, The bond we had shared as brothers was shattered, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. "I can't do this anymore, Chloe," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't be with someone who doesn't love me, not the way I need to be loved. We need to end this. We need to move on." Her face crumpled, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I understand," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted it to end like this. You deserve so much more than I can give you." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer, unable to bear the weight of her remorse. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, the words heavy but necessary. "It's the only way." Chloe nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice breaking as she sobbed quietly into her hands. As I left the apartment, the weight of the past few days pressing down on me, I realized that this was the only way it could have ended. The love we had shared, the future we had planned, was all built on a foundation that had crumbled long before I ever knew it. Chloe had been living in Greg's shadow, just as I had been living in his. And now, the only way forward was to walk away from it all. But there was one more conversation I couldn't avoid. A few days later, I met with Greg. The conversation had been coming, unavoidable since the wedding. We met at a quiet park, far from the prying eyes of family and friends. I had spent the days before wondering what I would say, how I would react when I saw him. But when I arrived and saw him standing there, a part of me just felt tired. Greg looked at me with a mixture of regret and guilt. "I never wanted this to happen," he said, his voice low, eyes heavy with remorse. "I never meant for things to get this bad." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to find the words, but everything felt tangled up inside. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, my voice calm, but filled with the hurt I could no longer hide. "You knew. You must have known she had feelings for you." He nodded slowly, the weight of his own guilt clear in his eyes. "I did. I wasn't sure at first, but I knew. And I kept my distance because I didn't want to ruin things between us. I didn't want to betray you." His words hit hard, but I could see the truth in them. Greg had tried to stay away, to keep the boundaries clear, but Chloe's feelings had complicated everything. Still, the damage was done, and nothing he said could change that. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice flat. "There's no coming back from this." Greg's face tightened, and he nodded. "I understand. I'm so sorry, man. I never wanted this to happen." The silence between us stretched on, filled with everything we couldn't say. And as much as I wanted to forgive him, to go back to the way things had been, I knew it was impossible. Our relationship, our bond as brothers, would never be the same again. Too much had been broken. "I need time," I finally said, looking away from him. "I need time to figure things out." Greg nodded again, his expression filled with regret. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." As I walked away, the weight of the past few weeks still pressing down on me, I realized that healing would take time. Time that I needed to find myself again, to rebuild the parts of me that had been shattered. But I also knew that this was the beginning of something new, something better. It was time to move forward. In the weeks after the divorce papers were filed, life felt like it had slowed to a crawl. The whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, had settled into a quiet numbness, and I spent most days just trying to put one foot in front of the other. The apartment felt too big, too empty, with Chloe's absence lingering in every corner. But with each passing day, the silence became less oppressive, less suffocating. Slowly, I began to reclaim the space as my own. There were still moments when the weight of everything hit me, the finality of what had happened. I would find myself replaying the events in my head, wondering how I had missed the signs, how I had let myself fall so deeply into something that was never real. But with time, those moments of doubt and regret became fewer, and I started to focus more on what came next. The hardest part had been letting go of the anger, not just at Chloe, but at Greg, at myself. It was easy to stay stuck in that place, to keep replaying the betrayal over and over until it consumed me. But I realized that holding on to that anger wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't take back the wedding, the confession, or the pain, and it wouldn't help me move forward. Greg had tried to reach out several times since our last conversation, offering his apologies, asking if there was any way to fix what had been broken. But I wasn't ready. Maybe one day, I thought. Maybe one day, I could sit across from him and talk like we used to. But not now. I needed to heal, to find myself again before I could even think about rebuilding the relationship we once had. Chloe, too, had reached out, but only once. It had been a short, heartfelt message, apologizing again for everything that had happened. She had written that she was leaving town, moving somewhere far away to start over. Part of me was relieved. It would be easier, I thought, to heal without her presence hovering in the background, a constant reminder of what I had lost. The truth was, as much as it hurt, I knew this was for the best. Chloe had never truly been mine, not in the way I had wanted, not in the way I deserved. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that our relationship had been built on fragile foundations from the start. I had been so eager to settle down, to build a life with her, that I had ignored the cracks, small but there, right from the beginning. I started to focus on the things that brought me peace, small moments of clarity in the midst of the storm. Mornings became my favorite time of day, when the world felt quiet, and I could sit with my thoughts, untangling the mess of emotions inside me. I began to read more, to take long walks, to reconnect with old friends who had stood by me through it all. Their support, their quiet presence, helped me heal in ways I hadn't expected. Little by little, I began to feel more like myself again, though a different version of myself, one shaped by the pain I had endured, but also by the strength I had found in surviving it. I realized that I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this, and that was okay. Pain changes you, but it also opens the door to growth, to becoming someone stronger, more aware of what you need and what you deserve. I've come to understand that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It leaves scars, yes, but those scars are reminders that you survived something that could have broken you. And as much as it hurt to lose Chloe, I know now that what I've gained in the process is far more valuable, a sense of who I am and what I want moving forward. I don't know what the future holds, but I've learned to embrace the uncertainty. There's a kind of freedom in not knowing, in letting go of the need to control everything. I'm learning to be okay with the unknown, to trust that whatever comes next will be something I can handle. I'm learning to trust myself again. The process of healing isn't linear. It's messy and complicated, filled with setbacks and moments of clarity. But I've come to realize that it's a journey worth taking. Because in the end, it's not about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't happen. It's about acknowledging the pain, accepting it, and then choosing to move forward anyway. I've made peace with the fact that my relationship with Greg may never be the same, and that's okay. Some things aren't meant to be fixed right away. Maybe with time, we'll find our way back to each other. Or maybe we won't. Either way, I'm learning to let go of the need for everything to be perfect, for everything to have a happy ending. Sometimes, the best you can do is find peace in the aftermath. As for Chloe, I hope she finds what she's looking for. I hope she learns to love in a way that doesn't hurt the people around her, and that she finds the happiness she couldn't find with me. I no longer hold anger or resentment toward her, because in the end, we were both searching for something we couldn't give each other. The future is wide open now, and for the first time in a long while, I feel ready to face it. I don't know what's coming next, but I do know this. I'll be stronger for whatever it is. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.